today wants to become a real poker player?
I do.
Hi, I'm Vince Van Patten. I've been playing poker and beating games at the highest level for many years. I'm also an actor and host of TV's hottest poker show. Now I'll tell you, being at every final table, analyzing the games of my colleagues, the best poker players in the world, has taught me a few more things about the game. For one, anyone can get pretty good and win at Texas Hold'em. That's right, you too can be at the final table of a tournament, or at least learn enough to get some respect at the poker table. And that's not bad. Now, there isn't much mystery to the way Hold'em is played, but there is a lack of quality teaching of the game. I believe that. Now, after you get through with this video, you'll have the advantage of having been properly taught the game, allowing you to beat your competitors and have a good time as well. So whether it's in your home game, your local casino, or in tournaments, I'm going to teach you to win and enjoy the social aspects of the game to its fullest. So get out your ultimate poker package. Let's get started. Now, to become a great poker player and really enjoy this game, there are nuances and tricks that you'll need to know, and we'll learn some of those in this video. But now let's make sure that you properly understand the basics of Texas Hold'em. We'll start out by learning how to deal the game, then how to read the board to determine the best possible hand. That's very important. Now, once you understand the mechanics of the game, I will teach you the strategy and tactics of poker and how to apply them to Texas Hold'em on a very basic level. For those of you new to the game of Texas Hold'em, I'll start you out playing in a very solid, safe, intelligent style that will give you a good foundation to build upon. All right? Ready to become a real poker player? Then, without further ado, let's move on and learn the great game of Texas Hold'em, the game that can make you or break you. The first thing you need to know in poker is what beats what. So let's take a minute to look at this chart of hands in order of strength. A poker hand consists of your best 5 cards, from the lowest hands to the best hand, a royal flush. Let's talk about the psychology of the game of poker for you beginners. Poker is the greatest gambling game in any casino by far. Did you know that? Do you know why? Because you're playing against other players, not the casino. They just take a small rake. Therefore, if you play smarter than your opponents and you're patient, you'll have an edge and you'll win. Let's talk about that for a second. What's the one thing in Hold'em poker that'll give you that edge? You know what it is? Little money down. This is great, except for the 2 automatic blind bets that we'll be talking about. You don't have to put up zilch, nothing. Zip and pip to look at 3 free cards. It is beautiful. You can be discretionary. You reject your starting hands and you won't lose anything. You can wait for the cards you want to play with. Now, this is a huge advantage. Just imagine waiting in blackjack for a 19 or a 20 before you put up your money. You would break the casino. That is why, if you're patient and smart and you listen to me closely, you can beat the game of poker. Texas Hold'em is played for a wide variety of limits. There's no limit, often seen played on TV, but what I'm going to be teaching you beginners, and what you'll see mostly in casinos and your home games, is limit poker. In limit poker, there's a betting structure, which is a 1 to 2 betting ratio. Throughout the hand, there's going to be 4 bets in all. The first 2 bets will be small bets. The last 2 bets twice as big. All right? The most common limits for these games are $1 and $2, $2 and $4, and then it goes up. I mean, in the casinos, you see players playing for $300 and $600. Big games. Now, you must bet exactly the predetermined amount, which is why it's known as a limit-structured game. Now, Texas Hold'em can be played with as few as 2 players and as many as 22 players. Now, you won't see that in the casino, but believe me, the best number of players to have at the table is 7 or 8. Now, where did I get the 22? Rumor has it, when it was played in the Old West, out on the prairie, you'd have 20 or so, cowboys, and they'd be sitting around the campfire wanting to play poker. But you couldn't deal everyone 5 cards. There weren't enough cards in the deck. So they figured they should deal 2 cards to each cowboy with 5 community cards right in the middle. Some believe that's how Hold'em got started. A lot of saddles probably got won in that game. Moving on. Hold'em is played for high hand only. The standard high hand always wins, and there are no wild cards. No rinky-dink stuff here. Now remember, the final poker hand is made up of exactly 5 cards. However, in Hold'em, you have 2 in your hand and 5 in the middle to make up your best 5-card poker hand. Because of the 2 blind feature of the game, there is no ante in Texas Hold'em, as there is in stud or draw poker. Blinds are players who are forced to put money in the pot before the cards are dealt. Now, why? To instigate action and put some value in the pot initially. The blinds force action from the first 2 players to the left of the dealer. The big blind is always the same amount as the small bet, and the small blind is 1/2 of the big blind. All right, for example, the blinds in a $4, $8 game would be $2 in the small blind and $4 in the big blind. Everyone else in this hand doesn't have to put up a nickel, but you still get to look at free cards. That's what I love about this game. The purpose of having 2 blinds is to create a situation where 2 of the players will have random hands. This mix of totally random hands and the other hands that the other players wish to play against them is designed to create a contest for the pot when the flop comes up. Okay, here we go. Bring in the poker players. Hello, how you doing? Good luck. Okay, I shuffle the cards. And I deal. Now each player will get 2 cards down, like so. These cards are called the pocket cards or hole cards. And you never show them to any other player, like, flash them like that. It's amateur hour, rinky-dink. Remember that the blinds have to put their bets in the pot before the deal. That would be $1 and $2, because let's play a $2 and $4 game. The play now starts to the player immediately to the left of the big blind, and will move clockwise around the table. Now, each player has 3 options in poker. She can fold, just get out of the hand. She can call, or she can what? She can raise. If no one has raised by the time the action comes back to the small blind, what can he do? He can fold, he can call, or he can raise at least the amount of the big blind. How much can he raise? The fixed amount. Remember, we're simulating a $2 and $4 game, so he can only raise $2 before the flop. No more, no less. In a limit game, the raise must be exactly the first set amount. And since the blinds had to put up their money in the pot before they saw their hands, they also have the option of raising themselves. If no one is raised by the time the action gets back to the big blind, he then has the option to check, and that means I bet nothing more, or I raise. After the first betting round is completed, the dealer burns the top card, that means we get rid of it, then turns the next 3 cards face up on the board. This is called the flop. Now there's another betting round, beginning with the small blind or the first player in the hand after the small blind if he's out. This round is played with the small bet structure. and 3 potential raise limits. So at this point, it's still $2 with 3 potential raise limits. Players may pass on to the next player until someone bets. Or perhaps everyone will check, costing no additional money to see the next card. Now, let's say a bet is made. Players must either call the bet, raise, or fold and go out of play for the remainder of the hand. Checking is no longer an option once a bet is made. Now the dealer burns another card and then turns the next card face up on the table. We call this 4th Street, or the turn card. Another round of betting among the players follows. For example, in our $2 and $4 game, we now jump up to the what? The $4 increment. It starts to sting. Gets to be fun. Last card's coming up. The river. I burnt, and there's the river card. It is all on the line. One last round of betting. You can check, you can bet, you can fold. When all the action is completed, there is a showdown. All the active players who want to claim the pot, they turn up their hands face up, and using the combination of your pocket cards and the 5 cards on the board, each player, with the help of the dealer, determines his best 5-card poker hand. The highest hand at the table, he wins. He takes the chips and usually starts chatting about something not very interesting. That's poker. The dealer button then moves one player to the left, marking the next dealer's position. The blinds are posted by the next 2 players, and the game begins all over again. But first, let's learn how to read the board.
When you're first beginning learning how to play, you have to be able to read position, understand what hands play in what positions, and also be able to read a board and read what your opponent has. If you're a beginning player, instead of sitting there when you're out, you want to sit there and really study your opponents and try to put them on a hand. And if you keep guessing what your opponent has over and over and over, you'll get better at it, and it'll come with time.
One of the best features of Texas Hold'em is that you always know what the best possible hand is at any stage of the game. Before the flop, when all you have are your 2 hold cards, a pair of aces is the best possible hand. If the hand were over at that point, you'd always win. There's no way to beat pocket aces with only 2 cards. If you had pocket kings, you would still win most of the time, because the odds against someone holding pocket aces when you hold kings are very remote. Let's take a look at some helpful examples of how to read the board during the flop, the turn, and the river stages of the game. The cards that come on the flop tell you which way the hand is headed. With only 3 cards out there, you can tell immediately what is the best possible hand. Here are some sample flops. Let's determine the best possible hand. King, King, Jack. Anytime the flop contains a pair, the best possible hand will either be 4 of a kind or a full house, depending on whether you can account for one of the key cards. If you have no other information, the best possible hand for this flop is 4 kings. If you have one of the kings in your hand, you know no one else can make 4 of a kind, and therefore the best possible hand could be only a full house. Anyone holding a king and a jack would have the nuts at this point. A cinch, a little piece of heaven, show tunes going off in your head when you flop this. 7, 7, 5. The best possible hand is 4 sevens, followed by 7s full of 5s, and then 5s full of 7s. King, 7, deuce. Anytime there are 3 cards of the same suit on the flop, the best possible hand will be a flush. If those 3 cards are within 5 ranks of each other, the best possible hand will be a straight flush. Anyone holding the ace of hearts and any other heart has the nuts with this flop. If no one has 2 hearts in his hand, the next best hand would be 3 of a kind. Queen, 9, 7. The best possible hand is the ace of spades and any other spade. Reading the hands becomes a bit more difficult once an extra card hits the table. Let's make sure you get plenty of practice. For the following examples, try to figure out what the 1st through the 4th best hands are. Because although the best hand and the second best hands might be obvious, It takes a little more analysis to figure out the next few hands after that. By the way, don't forget, you don't have to have the best hand necessarily to win. There is a little thing called the bluff. But it is nice to know what the best hands are. 5, 6, 9, 6. The best 4 hands here are 4 sixes, 9s full of 6s, 6s full of 9s, and 6s full of 5s. Ace 5, 3, 3. The best hands are 4 3s, aces full of 3s, 5s full of 3s, and 3s full of aces. King, Jack, 10, Queen. The best hands are an ace high straight, an ace in any other card, a king high straight, a 9 in any lower card, 3 kings, then 3 queens. The river. We've made it to the last betting round now. If you practice enough, you should still be able to predict the 4 best hands in each of the next examples, even with 5 cards on the table. 5, 6, 9, 6, Queen. The best possible hand here is 4 sixes, followed by queens full, then 9s full, and then 6s full of queens. Ace 5, 3, 3, 4. The nuts here is a 5 high straight flush, then 4 3s, aces full of 3s, then 5s full of 3s. Often there will be no straight, flush, or full house possible after the river card hits the board. No 3 cards will be within 5 ranks of each other. There won't be 3 or more cards of the same suit, and the board will not be paired. These boards are called zero boards. The highest possible hand will always be what? Exactly 3 of a kind. Zero boards not only are easy to read, they also help you quickly figure out what your opponents might be holding. Here's an example of a zero board. Ace, King, 9, 6, 4. The best possible hands here are 3 aces, 3 kings, 3 9s, and then 3 6s. Since you don't have to worry about the possibility of a straight, a flush, or a full house, all you have to do is think about the likelihood that your opponent has flopped a set. That means 3 of a kind, against you. If there was a lot of raising before the flop, and the pre-flop raiser continues betting throughout the hand, then you could possibly assume that he has a set of aces or kings, given a zero board such as the one we just looked at. Don't forget that if you're a beginner, don't be too tough on yourself. Allow yourself a training period where we'll agree in advance that results don't matter. After all, nobody can expect to be a big winner while still learning, no matter what the subject is. Now that you have some of the basics under your belt, we can change our focus from the broad and general to the more narrow and specific aspects of the game. Position is a very important concept to consider when playing poker. It is especially important when playing flop games like Hold'em, because your betting position stays the same throughout all 4 betting rounds of the hand. If you're first to bet before the flop, then you'll be first to bet on the flop, on the turn, and on the river. You'll always have to make your move without knowing what the players behind you will do, while the other players will always be able to decide how to play their hands in light of what you've already done. This is a huge edge for late position players. Your position relative to the other players is so important that it's one factor you're going to have to consider when deciding to play every hand that you're going to play for the rest of your poker playing life.
I ask people all the time, you should play poker. Oh, I don't have a poker face. I can't play poker. You don't need a poker face, really. There's this whole misconception that it's all about seeing through your soul and this and that, but really, if you just learn the fundamentals and you just sort of have a basic understanding, you basically look for betting patterns. You're not looking for a nose twitch, for this guy eating an Oreo cookie, or oh, when he's bluffing, his ears wiggle.
Here's one good rule, all right? Play extremely tight or conservative under the gun. That means first position. Tight in early position, then loosen up your playable hands as your position improves. Your position improves as players ahead of you act on their hands. Once again, why? You get to see them checking, folding, or betting before you have to do anything. What an advantage. Your position also gets better from one betting round to the next as players behind you fold. Now, when you call to see the flop, there are a few things you should consider. First, you have to estimate whether you can see the flop for just one bet, because you never know for sure, so don't be upset if you're occasionally raised. How many players are left to act behind you? The more there are, the more likely it is you could be raised. Okay? Got to assume that. Is it good enough to play for 2 bets when you'd rather play for 1 bet? Most poker writers have their own idea of what constitutes a group of good starting hands. For our purposes here, we're going to use a list we created specifically for this video. The hands are arranged in these groups because each hand in a group has approximately the same value to you before the flop as the other hands listed in the group. That means that before the flop, all hands in a group can be played in about the same way. Of course, each hand will be played differently after the flop. Knowing this list will help keep you out of trouble while you're learning other aspects of the game. Here are some things to get in the habit of with each group. Next time you play Hold'em, raise and re-raise with Group 1 hands. Also, be the one to put in the last raise before the flop. With Group 2 hands, always raise before the flop if you are first after the big blind to enter the pot. If you are re-raised, just call. With Group 3 hands, always see the flop unless you have to call 3 or 4 bets cold. That would be too expensive. If you call 2 bets cold and a player behind you re-raises, go ahead and call to see the flop. The hands in Group 4 should be played if you can limp in for only 1 bet. Don't call 2 or more bets cold, but if you limp in for 1 bet and somebody raises behind you, go ahead, call to see the flop. For the rest of the hands, don't play them unless you're in one of the blinds, which means you've already invested. Following this list of starting hands will help ensure that you're in a good position for the hands you play, so you'll have a decent chance to win them. This style of tight or aggressive play you just learned works very well in most any Hold'em game. It may not be the most profitable style play at all times in all games, but it sure is a great way to start when you're first learning the game. In the long run, if you're a good enough player, any profit you make will come from the mistakes your opponents make when they play against you. One typical mistake your opponents will make is to play too many hands. Poker theory says that the best way for you to take advantage of that error is also to play a few more hands than average. Don't play too many more hands, though, just a few more. Now I'm going to show you another starting hand strategy. This new strategy is designed to be fairly conservative, safe, easy to understand, but maybe a little more fun to play. Once you've learned this new strategy, you'll know 2 different starting hand strategies, allowing you to mix up your game so your opponents won't always be sure of what you have, which increases the likelihood that they'll make mistakes. Remember, your opponent's mistakes mean more profit for you. This new way of choosing your starting hand is based on understanding your play rather than memorizing certain groups of hands. Our new rule says you're going to consider playing with these 3 types of hands. You can now play virtually all pocket pairs. You can even see the flop with the small pairs under the right conditions. Suited aces. Hands like ace 8 of spades or even ace deuce of spades qualify under this category. Hands that add up to 20 or 21. An ace counts as an 11. Face cards count as 10, and all other cards are worth their face value. For example, ace-jack is 21 points. King-queen is 20 points. And ace-9 is also 20 points. Ace of spades, 8 of clubs, is not a playable hand because it is not suited and does not add up to 20. In our new strategy, you'll be playing twice as many hands as you were playing using the other system. However, not all of these hands are playable all the time from all positions. There are several factors that you have to consider when deciding whether to see the flop with your hand. I'm going to run down the list with some general advice about how to play each hand. Ace-ace. This is the best hand you can get before the flop. It is the hand that wins more often than any other hand, and it's the hand that wins the most money for you in the long run in a limit game. There are several ways to play pocket aces before the flop. Which strategy you choose depends on which goal you want to focus on. If you raise in early position, you will knock out most players, which will increase your chances of winning the hand. Since there will be only a few players in the hand, however, a raise in early position will also decrease the size of the final pot. If you are in a late position, and a lot of players have already called, your raise will build a big pot. But the presence of so many players in the pot reduces your chances of winning the hand. It's a trade-off between small pot with a good chance of winning and a large pot with a reduced chance of winning the hand. King, king. You can play pocket kings in almost the same way you play pocket aces, but you have to consider a few more things. Even though the odds are 19.5 to 1 against it, any other player who's raising could have pocket aces. There's also the dreaded ace overcard on the flop, which will come up 22.5% of the time. For these reasons, if you're in late position with pocket kings, you might want to just limp in for one bet to see the flop. If you get an ace on the flop, it's easier to throw the hand away, since you have only one bet invested. Plus, if you flop another king or something else you really like, your strength will be very well disguised. Queen, queen. You will flop one or more overcards without another queen on the board 31.1% of the time. If there are a lot of players already in the pot, you're not going to knock anyone out by raising. If 6 players have already called, then they have a total of 12 cards among them. It's very likely that there's an ace and a king among those 12 cards. So, I generally do not raise in late position with pocket queens. I like to limp in for one bet. If an ace or a king comes on the flop and there's a bet, I can easily throw away the hand. I want to emphasize that you're not really playing against just the one player who bet. You're playing against the 12 cards the others are holding. Here's what I mean. I'm going to pull 2 queens from this full deck of cards. Shuffle. And now I'll look at the first 12 cards off the top of the deck. You can see how many aces and kings there are in these 12 cards. This test certainly coincides with my actual experiences in years of play. Kings and aces among these cards suggest that at least one of those players who was just called may have an overcard to your queen. Jack, jack. You will get an overcard and no jack 47% of the time. For that reason, I usually like to see the flop as cheaply as possible, because I know that I'll often be throwing it away after the flop. Except if I'm in late position and only the blinds are in, I will raise to steal the blinds. And if everyone is called and it's raised, I will re-raise to build a pot, since I have great drawing odds. 10-10. The best advice I can give you is to play this hand even more carefully than you play pocket jacks. You will get an overcard and no 10 60% of the time. If there's no overcard on the flop, one will come on the turn or the river 57% of the time. You usually have to flop another 10 or be drawing to the high end of a straight to have a good hand after the flop with pocket 10s. 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s, and deuces. I put all of these pairs in the same category because each one has an incredibly high probability of flopping an overcard without flopping a set. The lower your pocket pair is, the more all caveats apply, and the luckier you have to get on the flop. If you stay in, see the flop as cheaply as you can. There's no law that says you have to play the hand anyway. I routinely fold pocket deuces, 3s, 4s, and even 5s if it is raised pre-flop and I respect the raiser. You can raise to steal the blinds in late position with these hands, but your decision to do so should depend on your ability to play and read your opponent after the flop, if he calls. Ace-king suited. I play this hand before the flop about the same way I play pocket aces, kings, or queens. You will flop an ace, a king, a straight draw, a flush, or a 4-flush about 50% of the time. With odds like that, I like to have as many players in as possible with as many raises as we can get in before the flop. Ace-queen suited, ace-jack suited, ace-10 suited. These hands play like ace-king suited, except you have to worry about the gap between the cards. With ace-queen suited, beware of a king on the flop with no ace. With ace-jack suited, watch out for a king or a queen on the flop with no ace. With ace-10 suited, a king, queen, or jack with no ace, unless of course it's all three, causes you concern if there's any action after the flop. Ace-9 suited down to ace-deuce suited. Until I see the flop, I play these hands as if they weren't suited for two good reasons. Number one, if you flop an ace, your kicker is usually no good unless you make two pair with it. Number two, when you have two suited cards, you'll end up without a flush about 95% of the time. So most of the time, you'll be stuck with the strength of your non-ace card to help win the pot. And low cards aren't usually very helpful. Hands that total 20 or 21. King, queen suited. This hand is almost as good as ace-king suited, but look out for an ace on the flop. 1 out of 3 times that you make a flush with this hand, the ace of your suit will be on the board. I often don't mind getting an ace on the flop because if a jack or 10 comes with it, I have the nut straight draw. It traps anyone holding an ace if you make the straight. King jack suited, king 10 suited. With these hands, you'd rather pair the jack and 10 because a pair of 10s with a king kicker is a better hand than a pair of kings with a 10 kicker. This is due in large part to the fact that most hands will come down to a contest of kickers. That would be the second card. And whatever you pair on the board might also pair your opponent's hands. Until you see the flop, you should usually play these hands as if they weren't suited, unless you're raising to steal the blinds. Ace-king. Popular poker wisdom says to raise before the flop with this hand, but my years of experience at the table and on the computer have convinced me that you should usually just limp in. The exceptions are if you're in late position and you can raise in an attempt to steal the blinds, or if the game is short-handed and you can raise to knock players out. You won't flop another ace or king about 75% of the time, but if you get a good flop, great. You'll have made an extra bet with a winning hand. If you miss, you'll still find that the other players will often check to you, since you raised before the flop. You can surprise them by checking also and seeing the turn card for free. Sometimes they'll even check around to you again, assuming that now you'll bet since you showed strength before the flop and the bets have doubled. You can check again and see the river card and therefore the entire hand for free. See how one little raise before the flop set up all these advantages? These aren't the only hands you'll ever play in Hold'em. You're going to be in the blinds about 20% of the time, and most of the hands you get in the blinds and you'll have to play will be garbage. So even with those garbage hands, you can flop the nuts. That's the exciting thing about this game, right?
Right.
Yes.
All right.
Poker's part of civilization now. It's accepted now, I guess is the best thing I could say. You know, before, it seemed like it was in the back rooms, the smoky back rooms, and it's all professional sitting back there and, you know, sort of like a hidden thing. Now it's out in the public, everybody's doing it, all the actors are doing it. It's fantastic.
Poker theory says that all betting starts out as a contest for the antes, or in the case of flop games, the blinds. When a player has no money invested in the hand and the size of the pot is very small, he has little incentive to enter the pot unless his hand is pretty good. If he does call, he knows that the other players behind him might also call, so he'll often raise to discourage competitors from entering the pot. This play is called raising to eliminate players. It's only one of the 5 major reasons to raise, especially before the flop. Now, the 5 major reasons to raise are, number 1, to eliminate players, like we talked about. Number 2, to get a free card, right? Number 3, to gain information. 4, to get value from your hand. And 5, to bluff. That's right, bluff or semi-bluff. Let's look at some examples of how to use each of these tactics in a real game. Raising to eliminate players works best before the flop, when a player doesn't have any money invested in the pot already. It also works quite well on the flop and on the turn, when a player may have only one bet in the pot, and he doesn't have the right odds to continue with the hand. Raising to eliminate players on the river is less effective, because at that point, all the cards are out. Your opponent will call based on his pot odds and his estimation of your hand. Raising to get a free card sometimes works before the flop, because it may induce players to check to you when they see the flop, but you can't always count on it. If the flop makes a great hand for one of your opponents, the fact that you raise before it won't stop them from betting right into you. Now, raising to get a free card works best on the flop when the other players flop what they consider to be a weak or drawing hands. Because the bet doubles on the turn, that's the 4th street, and on the river, that's the last card, of course, raising to get a free card, it doesn't work then. It just costs as much to raise as it does to call the next bet. Raising to get a free card works best on the flop because the bet doubles on the next card. If you've raised before the flop, however, the other players will sometimes all check to you on the flop. You can then also check, and you all get to see the turn card for free. This happens less often, but it is worth keeping in mind. Okay. The next thing I want you guys to learn is raising to gain information. Now, this works best if you're re-raising a player that's a flop raiser, or if you raise a player who has bet on the flop. Your opponent's reaction to your raise is loaded with information if you know how to interpret what you see. Now, you usually won't raise to gain information on the turn or on the river, because a raise there will have quite a different effect on your opponents. Sometimes, many of your opponents will have folded anyway, and you won't need to raise them or force them out of the hand. Maybe you'll find yourself left with just 1 or 2 opponents, and you'll want to have a good idea of what they might be holding. So, you raise anyway. That's called raising to gain information, and it works best before the flop and on the flop.
Study hard. Know your opponent. Know what you're doing, and when you do, that confidence will just be all over you, and the opponents will read it and be afraid of you, you know? And then look out, because you're gonna be taking their money.
Raising to gain information on the flop is a very common tactic. Basically, you want to know the answer to one of 2 questions. Number 1, at the moment, does my opponent have a better hand than I do? And number 2, is he on a draw? Have you ever seen anyone raise and then fold when it was re-raised? When he had to call only one small bet to see the next card? Of course you have. Who folds after he has raised and has to call only one small bet to see the next card? You do. That's who. Seriously, if you're beat and you know it, then there's absolutely no reason you should call another bet with this hand. Now, too many players, they call that last re-raise because it happens so quickly, they don't give it too much thought. Don't fall into that trap of making automatic plays just because you're in the middle of a heated contest. Do you understand that? Mm-hmm. All right. Your raise, it served its purpose. You found out what you wanted to know about your opponent's hand. Now, it's only one hand, so you just let it go. Take comfort in the fact that you're saving a bet. It's got to feel good, where you know that other players would be losing that bet and subsequent ones. Raising to get value from your hand works well before the flop, on the turn, and on the river. See, a raise for value often has the undesired effect of making inferior hands fold when you would rather that they call. But you can't always know that in advance whether that will happen. So, of the 5 reasons to raise, this one is the easiest to understand. Whenever you have the best hand and you want to make the other players pay the price for having second best hand, all you have to do is raise. So, what is raising for value? You are raising to get other players to put more money into a pot you expect to win. That's betting for value. You don't always have to have the nuts to be able to bet for value. If you think you have the best hand at the table, you can also raise for value, even if your hand isn't the best hand possible. See, the key is knowing when your hand is probably the best, even if it's not the best hand possible. Raising to bluff is an unusual tactic in the lower limit games, and you won't see it very often. Raising to semi-bluff, though, is very common, especially on the flop, and you'll use this tactic very frequently in your game. Semi-bluffing is defined as betting with a hand that, if called, probably isn't the best hand at the moment, but it has a big chance to improve with more cards to come. It's a cross between betting as a bluff and betting for value, when you know there's not much value at the moment. Semi-bluff opportunities arise very frequently during the course of a hold'em game. Now, it is very important that you understand and truly believe that your real goal in semi-bluffing is to win the pot right then. If you misplay your hand in these situations, you'll have a big leak in your game, so to speak, because situations like this arise very often. When you go back and look at the 5 reasons to raise, you can see that they are all interconnected. In other words, it's nearly impossible to raise chiefly for one reason without making it seem that you could be raising for another reason. So, if you raise to eliminate players, you might also get a free card, gain information, get value from your hand, and possibly make your opponent think that you are semi-bluffing. Very exciting. Raising at the right time and knowing why you're raising is one of the hallmarks of a great player. So it is very important that you understand everything in this lesson. Using the tactic of raising correctly, along with correctly selecting your before the flop hand, will help you become the second best type of hold'em player there is. Tight aggressive. Tight aggressive means that you see the flop with relatively few hands. When you do decide to play a hand, you take charge of the hand and you play very aggressively. And the best way to be aggressive is to be what? A raiser. That's right. And now you have 5 good reasons to raise. Congratulations. What you have just learned are the basics of how to play the great game of Texas Hold'em. You know how to deal the game, read the cards on the board, you understand the importance of playing position, correct? You learned 2 different strategies for helping you to choose your starting hand, and you learned all about raising and the 5 major reasons to raise. So, I suggest you keep playing with this information in mind until you are confident and ready to move on. And remember, when you're good, and I mean really good, it's all about reading people. The psychological importance of this game becomes gigantic. You start to be able to predict what your opponents are holding. That's when you know you've really arrived. I mean, it is so exciting. The game actually becomes poetic, I believe. So, keep learning, and remember, never try to bluff the sucker. Ante up. Okay, I want to see it all come out right now. I want to see your best game. I want you to relax because you are beginners, but you're enjoying it. Okay, who's it on? That's good. Tighten up.
Raise.
Ah, beautiful. That's nice. Very good. Okay, you guys are getting it. Don't forget, stare at the players. Watch the other players. Don't watch your cards. Watch the other players. That's good. Play tight, but when you have the hand, bump it up. Don't be afraid to raise either. All right, there's a little too much action in this game. Okay, you're learning. That's good, though. All right, here we go. Here's the flop. Burning. Magic flop.
The Ultimate Poker Company is dedicated to making you the best poker player you can be. At ultimatepokercompany.com, our website is filled with books, videos, and poker playing accessories to make you a complete poker player. You'll also find additional tips, commentary, and information on poker tournaments and events. Log on now to www.ultimatepokercompany.com.